Hello everyone. So in this lecture, we are going to understand about the phosphorus cycle. So basically, phosphorus cycle is also one of the major biogeochemical cycles which describes the process by which phosphorus is circulated inside the nature. So unlike the nitrogen cycle and the sulfur cycle and carbon cycle, phosphorus is not something that is readily available to the plants through the atmosphere because the nitrogen cycle, if we talk about it basically has nitrogen gas which is present in the atmosphere as the primary source. If we talk about carbon cycle, then carbon dioxide is something that is present as the gaseous form so that the carbon can be delivered to the plant. But when we talk about the phosphorus cycle, there is no specific gaseous form of this like element that is found. So phosphorus is majorly uh, formed in this cycle. So the major sources of phosphorus includes the rocks, right? So let's just talk about this phosphorus cycle in a little bit of detail now. So there are a total of 5 stages that are involved in this cycle. The weathering stage, mineralization by the plants, assimilation by animals, decomposition by microorganisms, and the fifth one is the geological uplift by the tectonic movements. So let's just try to understand this through this diagram. So the first stage involves weathering. So as I just told you that the sedimentary rocks, basically, they are the primary and the major source of phosphorus because phosphates, they are found in these sedimentary rocks as phosphate ions. And these phosphates, they are leached out from these rocks through the various processes and also from other environmental sources. And this process of leaching out of this phosphorus from the rocks is known as weathering. So you can call it as weathering of the rocks, right? So other than the weathering process, there are several other sources from which the phosphate can be obtained, like the volcanic ashes or the mineral dust. So they also act as the significant phosphate sources. So what happens is that due to the leaching out of the phosphates, basically the weathering, the phosphate is converted into the like proper forms and it goes into the underground phosphate reserves, or this phosphate can be carried by the water. So this is what the first stage basically explains. Now the next step is the conversion of this phosphate into usable form. Now this conversion of the organic phosphate which is present inside the reserves into the inorganic form so that it can be utilized readily by the plants is known as the mineralization process. So mineralization process basically helps the plant to absorb the phosphorus in its usable forms. Also, the next step is the assimilation by the animals because the animals, they feed onto the plants. When they feed onto the plants, the phosphorus that is present inside the plants gets inside the animal body. Because you know that the herbivorous plants, the herbivorous animals, they feed onto the plants, and the carnivorous animals, they feed onto the animals. So subsequently, this phosphorus is being circulated inside all the living bodies. Also, apart from feeding onto the plants, the animals can also obtain the phosphorus directly from the drinking water. All right. So the next step involves decomposition. So these plants and these animals, when they die, they have to become decomposed and they have to decay. So this decomposition process is carried out by the microorganisms. So microorganisms, they start to feed on these living organisms, and hence the phosphate that is the compounds that are containing phosphorus, they are carried into the soil, into the rivers and then lakes and oceans and all that, and they subsequently form the sediments. You can call it as underwater phosphate reserves as well. And the last stage involves the geological uplift by the tectonic movement. Now, this is something which is unique in this cycle because these underwater phosphate reserves that are formed, they have this tendency that these sedimentary rocks that are containing the phosphorus in the deep ocean, they can move from the ocean towards the land. And this process of the movement of the phosphate from the deep ocean towards the upper areas of the land is known as the geological uplift. So this process is unique in the phosphorus cycle. Therefore, the phosphorus that is thus deposited as the sediments, it is released into the environment through the process of weathering. So you can just see that everything is being circulated from the weathering of the rocks, the phosphate is getting into the underground phosphate reserves, and also it is contributing towards the underwater phosphate reserves as well, because the phosphate is being carried out by the water. And then this phosphate, which is there in the reserves, it is being converted into the usable form so that it can be absorbed by the plants readily by the process of mineralization. And this phosphorus, which is present in the plants, is then assimilated in the animals through the food chain. And when these animals and plants, they die, the phosphorus that is present in them, it is basically again getting back into the underground phosphate reserves and also into the underwater phosphate reserves, because the decomposition is being carried out by the microorganisms. And also the last process is the geological uplift, which basically is the phenomena by which the phosphate reserves, which are deep inside the ocean in the sedimentary rocks, it is getting moved towards the upper areas of land. And hence it contributes back into the formation of these rocks. And hence the process starts again. These rocks will again undergo the process of weathering and so on. So this was about the phosphorus cycle. Thank you.